Hey y'all, hi. So I have something that I've been chewing over in my mind. I decided to just put on the camera and chew over it out loud while I put on my makeup look for today. I guess it's an old school chatty get ready with me. When was the last time we saw one of those? If this happens to be your first time clicking on one of my videos, then I think you'll get a good sense of what I'm about actually in this one. I love beauty. This is mostly a beauty channel. I also make some fashion content. But I'm interested in the philosophical side of the love of beauty too, especially the way that it interacts with consumerism. I'm going to be talking over some of those ideas today. If you like it, I hope you'll subscribe. And now let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. I'm going to start with brows. I thought that I was going to darken my brows significantly. I brought not just the wax I've been using to hold them, but Gen C Arch Support, which I've been using to fill them out and darken them. The dye is starting to fade and I kind of miss that dark brow that I've had for the past couple of weeks since I dyed them. But this week's manifestation of the bangs was so long and swoopy that they're pretty much completely covering my brows. So I'm going to put this Benefit brow wax in them and see how I feel. So in addition to YouTube work, and actually for many years in addition to what I was doing until the pandemic, which was running a small business making tango clothes by hand and selling them to tango dancers. In addition to those two modes of work, those two jobs that have been like my primary jobs over the past 10 years, I guess, maybe even more than that. What is life? What is the past? Not really keeping track. In addition to them, I have been a freelance grant writer for climate activists until pretty recently, actually. Towards the end of last summer, I took a step back from that because I had too much on my plate, which is actually good. It's because the channel has grown. And I realized that I was running myself into the ground trying to keep up with all of the different kinds of work that I had. And I've always been a freelancer in that field, so it's something that I can always go back to. It's work that I love, actually, but I didn't want to hamstring the channel by keeping back energy that I could be putting into it. I would say I am a freelance grant writer for climate activists, but it's been 4 or 5 months since I've actually taken on a job. However, I was in that field for so long that I have a lot of friends, I have like professional acquaintances in that field, but funnily enough, a lot of them I have never met in person, partly because of the pandemic, but also just because of the mode of work. It's a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of international work, global initiatives that it makes more sense to conduct over email and through the internet than in person. I'm going to darken my brows just a little bit with this. And also I'm realizing now that I'm launching into it, I'm like starting at the very beginning, all the context. I'm realizing that I might not have enough makeup to keep up with the story. Like I'm going to finish my face with makeup and I'm going to be only a third of the way through the story. I mean, you probably could have told me that this was how it was going to go if I attempted a chatty get ready with me, but I probably need all the steps that I can get to make sure that we end the story and the makeup look around the same time. Anyway, here's where I'm going with this. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend an event with a bunch of the people that I've worked with for a long time, but not ever met in person. And even though I'm not currently doing that kind of work, I was so excited to go because it was just exciting to be able to meet these wonderful people, my colleagues, my erstwhile colleagues, give them a hug, like feel the energy in person, and also just reconnect a little bit because it's been almost half a year since we were connected. So this is how I found myself at a professional event, I guess you could say, in sort of a professional capacity, but in an environment that has absolutely nothing to do with my work on YouTube and my identity as a content creator here on YouTube, with the beauty space, the fashion space, with aesthetics at all, and with people who I know, but who don't really know this side of me. That's kind of where the story starts. So I was at this event, I was in a conversation with a couple of people, one of whom is a really lovely guy who started work at one of the organizations that I worked for right when I was backing away. So we overlapped a little bit. We hadn't worked together all that much. And of course, it was my first time meeting him in person. And the topic of my other work came up. So I was briefly describing my YouTube channel, what the content is about, the fact that it's a beauty channel, but that I also went on a no-buy year during my first year on YouTube. And consequently, my content has always been underlain by these questions about consumerism and shopping and to what degree aesthetics add joy to one's life. And, I was just sort of giving them a brief rundown. And it was really interesting because it was two people I was talking to, right? This a woman who I've actually worked with for a long time, who was really lovely, and this man who's also really lovely, who I had only worked with for a short time. So the woman, it was interesting because there were two really different reactions. The woman said, she kind of perked up and she was like, my sister has gone down a path sort of what you described. She, I think at one point was a little bit addicted to shopping or was just spending too much time and money in that space. So she kind of immediately knew and had real life context for what I was talking about. And the guy said, I hate shopping. And so in a sense, it was the opposite. It was like he immediately revealed that he had sort of no context for what I was talking about. He just felt like it was like the opposite of his experience. And it's not as though it's unusual to come across someone who dislikes shopping. In fact, my own husband claims to hate shopping. He's also very entertaining when we go shopping. So sometimes when it's my birthday and he's like, what do you want for your birthday? I'm like, I want you to come shopping with me because it's so entertaining. And it's pretty much the only day of the year that he'll agree to do it. But this is just to say, it's not as though I clutched my pearls in that moment and I was like, aghast, you hate shopping? I've never heard of such a thing. It's not that. That isn't what makes this a story. That wasn't where it got interesting. It gets interesting in just a moment. But I think that if I don't fall silent and focus on whether or not my brows are done, I'll literally just be doing my brows until I finish the story. BRB. Okay, it's a little bit of an uneven situation. It's funny, uneven brows, like slight discrepancies, which there pretty much always are, and like differences between the two brows, are much more noticeable on camera than in person. And I think it's because in person, like when you're looking in the mirror, it's not really instinctive to look at both brows at once. You're kind of like looking at one or the other. When you look at a picture or, the footage of yourself played back on camera, you see it all of a piece and little differences become more glaring. I've just become aware of that over the years. But today, we've got the bangs. Nobody can see what's going on under there. So as I've said, I have what I would call a philosophical interest in some of these questions, like why do we love beauty? Why do we shop? Why do we long for things? And when you have a philosophical interest in something, there's nothing better than meeting someone who believes the opposite or has the opposite feeling about something or reaction to something than you do. Or maybe not necessarily the opposite, but a different take. Especially when it's an intelligent, articulate person who's willing to engage and you can kind of dig into why they have the take that they have. So even though I have some experience with people who hate shopping, and I kind of expected that I knew what the answer was going to be, or at least part of what the answer was going to be based on that, the first thing that I did when I heard this was to ask him, why? Why do you hate shopping? Can you explain it to us? What I was expecting based on my experience with Joe and other people who hate shopping, like everyone in my family, for example, I was expecting him to say that he doesn't like having to make decisions, that it's overwhelming, having to do all of the research, that it's boring, that it's kind of like an endless rabbit hole and it's stressful. And that when it comes to something like clothes shopping, for example, he feels like he doesn't have all of the context, the general knowledge about fashion or aesthetics. And so he feels at sea. He feels like he's in a world that he doesn't really understand and doesn't know how to make good decisions. And then there's money involved and it just feels like a mess and he'd kind of rather not go down that path. That is my impression, I think, from people I know who really would rather not go shopping. And those are the people who are like, I make a plan, I know exactly what I want, I just get in, get out, I don't enjoy the process of shopping, right? So I was expecting it would be some manifestation of that he would say. And I just wanted to know, I wanted to know how it would emerge from him, sort of how he would put the pieces together. And also I was interested in getting to know this person. And so I was just curious about the context of his life and what this question would provoke. I'm using the Make Beauty Lash Prototype mascara, by the way. It's really dried out, become incredibly easy to use, and still very buildable. What happened, though, was that I received an answer that I totally didn't expect. I didn't expect it to be as deep as it was, honestly, and to be unrelated to the question of decision-making or the stress around aesthetics or any of that. Here's what he said, this guy. I will try to give it to you word for word as best I can. I'm probably not getting it exactly right, but this is pretty much exactly what he said. My time is so precious to me. And when I have time in my life, I want to spend it going to the movies or cooking a meal with my partner, doing things, living. And so the idea of spending time doing something like going to the mall, spending time shopping feels like such a waste. That was what he said. Now, this was a couple of weeks ago, so it was kind of fresh on the heels for me of conceiving of and filming that video about the fantasy self. And I think that that was why I felt so electrified in that moment when this was his answer. He was very clear that this was the reason and passionate about it. And it immediately, this answer went into my brain and started to kind of catalyze with all of these questions about the fantasy self, thoughts about the fantasy self that I had been mulling over in preparing that video, and also all the things that you all had responded to that video with, all of your comments and your thoughts about the fantasy self, the dream of the self, the dream of life that so many of us have and so many of us end up making purchases in service of. And I felt like I did learn a lot about this guy who I had just met in that moment, because what I learned about him, and it strikes me as unusual actually in some ways, a very unusual and mature answer because of this. He was saying to me with his answer that to him, shopping for stuff is the opposite of life, like living life, doing the things that make life good. In that fantasy self video, the concept of the fantasy self, the lie of marketing that I talked about, it's wrapped around the idea, the perception that shopping for stuff is the same as living life, or that at the very least that it will facilitate, that it will be the springboard for the life that you want. And this guy was here saying to me, I just want to live the life that I want, and spending time shopping feels like a detour from that. It feels like going in the opposite direction, opposite from the aspirational self, the aspiration of good life. So it kind of set me back on my heels. I mean, not that it's a weird answer or anything. It's just, first of all, so beautiful. Really, really wonderful. And also just gives me a way to think about the alternative to buying into the lie of the fantasy self or the lie of the advertising industry that shopping is the way to get yourself the life that you want. A really concise, clear, and truthful way to think about rewriting the story of a life well lived so that it kind of writes shopping out of the equation, like out of the necessary equation, and makes it just a thing that we do once in a while to kind of support things that maybe support the equation, but that it's not in the equation, which is where it is inside of that lie of advertising. One way to think of it, or like reframing what he said as a question and turning it back around on those of us who struggle with the fantasy self and struggle with overspending, framing it as a question would look like, what if shopping for stuff to support the life that you want to live is actually taking time away from the actions that you need to do to build the life that you want to live? What if shopping in that aspirational way, shopping towards the fantasy of life, what if that's actually a distraction and it's doing the exact opposite of what you want? Wasting your time, it's causing you to spend energy and money on something that isn't actually life, but is just stuff. I just can't get this voice out of my head, this guy saying to me, my time is so precious to me. And when I have time, what I want to do is fill in the blank, like the actions, the life itself. Whatever that blank is for you, whatever it is you want to be doing. What if shopping for stuff that feels adjacent to that thing you want to be doing is actually holding you back from the life you want? For me, before my no-buy year, this was definitely the case. It was holding me back from being the person that I wanted to be, partly because I was spending so much time obsessing over things that I wanted to buy, but also because I was spending all my money on it. And so I just never had any resources. I never had a way to get ahead. I think I want to put on one more coat of mascara, but I'm going to do it in silence. Otherwise, the lashes will build and build until they're up to here. All right, that's lashes. I'm going to do cheeks, and I really want like a very glossy, colorful cheek. I'm going for this kind of soft, pinky, but glowy look. So I brought the Lisa Eldridge Elevated Glow Serum, which I haven't used in a really long time, and also the Kjaer Weis Cream Blush in Blossoming, which I also haven't used in a long time. I'm going to mix them together and really try to gloss up my cheeks. I'm not wearing very much base, actually just green color corrector and some spot concealer. I didn't put like concealer under here to brighten up under my eyes and give myself that blank canvas look. I wanted more of a real skin look because I feel like that supports a super glossy cheek even better. I actually think I'm going to start with the highlighter I usually start with blush with stuff like this. I'm going to start with the highlighter. So what I ended up saying in the moment in the conversation, again, kind of fresh off of my Fantasy Self video and reading all the comments from you all on that video, I said to him, I think this is really beautiful and also in some ways for these times in which we live, kind of an unusual answer, because what you've just said with your answer is, I love my life. What you've just said is, I love my options and when I want to live my life, I want to engage with the people and the daily activities and the opportunities of my actual life that are right there in front of me. And the only thing keeping me from doing those things is time. Things like cooking dinner with one's partner, going to the movies. What you've said with your answer is, I'm happy with my life. I love my life. And I think that what causes people to overspend in this kind of blind grasping way is unhappiness with one's life, right? Wanting one's life to be different, being dissatisfied, that constant sense of dissatisfaction, that feeling that there must be something better, that the life that's available to you right now, the things that you do have time for, that you do have room for, that you are capable of doing, those things aren't good enough. And that you on some level aren't good enough. And so you go looking for something else, looking for something more. And the advertising industry cleverly routes that seeking into shopping. I mean, I would even go so far as to say that the advertising industry is responsible in many cases for creating that illusion, that belief that what you have isn't good enough. You might have the same opportunity. You might be able to cook dinner with your partner a couple of times a week and go to the movies anytime you want. You might have the resources and the time for that. And you might love your partner just as much as this guy loves his partner. And you might love movies just as much as he loves movies. But I think that for many of us who are stuck in this overspending thing, this fantasy self thing, the messages of the advertising industry, and in some cases the messages of social media, they make what we have feel not as good to us, seem not as special to us as what this guy has feels to him. His answer revealed to me that he takes a lot of pleasure in these things, these really precious things, which are not necessarily easy to come by. A partner that you love, enough time and money to go to the movies every once in a while. But those things also aren't necessarily so aspirational as to be like fully out of anyone's grasp, except for those who are at the very, very top of the pyramid of success, whatever that means, like financial, professional, success at life. He wasn't saying my time is precious to me and what time I do have, I want to spend it working really hard so that I can become incredibly wealthy or honing my craft so that I can win the Nobel Prize or whatever. You know what I mean? That's not what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about pursuing success on that level. He was just talking about wanting to live, wanting to use his time to live. That Lisa Eldridge thing, it's nice. It's good makeup. Wow. Yeah. I feel like it's back. I'm going to want to wear it tomorrow again. That is the glowy cheek that I imagined. This mauve lip liner is all that I have down here for putting my mole back on, but I actually think it kind of works. And now I'm going to line my lips with it and think about what to say next. This is the Lancome lip liner in natural mauve, by the way, the lip liner that I wore when I got married. I like it because it's really, really, really sticky. It has a stick-to-itiveness that one desires from a lip liner. It really is a pretty color. So clearly this is just me telling the story of this interaction that I had at a moment when my mind was particularly alive with these questions about fantasy and aspiration and quality of life and like how we think about ourselves, the person we want to be, right? Because my reaction to his statement was to say, you're telling me that you love your life, which I actually think is kind of a rare quality. I think dissatisfaction has been sown among us. Our digital world, both the way it represents other people, real people, and the way it represents life through advertising, is really designed to make us dissatisfied with our own lives because then we shop. So I both think that that's relatively rare. And it also clarified for me something about the fantasy self, which is that a way of talking about it is to say, I have this fantasy that it reflects back dissatisfaction. Like it's sort of a manifestation, like a crystallized, embodied version of my dissatisfaction with my own life. And also maybe the thing that's kind of causing it. Or it's like a feedback loop. It's helping to fuel those unhealthy fantasies, the ones that you don't ever plan to actually fulfill. You don't want to follow through on the actions. And I'll link the Fantasy Self video in case you haven't seen it, because now I'm like referencing it heavily. Those fantasies that if you really ask yourself, am I going to do the requisite actions? The answer is no. And they're just there lurking, and you're tempted to buy the stuff that the fantasy self would have, or you've already bought the stuff and you won't declutter it. Those fantasies, it's like they are sitting there in your life, in your house, sustaining this discontent that advertising and social media is sowing in you and trying to cause to grow until you buy something, and then to grow until you buy something else. And I think that this is something, this by the way is Merit Baby. Since I've started wearing strong lips again, I'm like making my way through my entire complement of the Merit lipsticks, like my favorite lipstick formula. Even it is like a little vampy on me at full pigment like that, like full creamy pigment. That's more how I like to wear these lipsticks. It's like more than half of it has been blotted off. It's got this nice chapsticky feel, like it won't go anywhere now, even if I eat and drink a little bit. What I was going to say is that one of the reasons I'm so interested in these ideas is that I am no stranger to discontent with my life. You know, before my no-buy year, even during, even after, as I was sort of trying to catch up with the changes that were happening in my brain chemicals because of stopping shopping for a year, I had to face a lot of ugliness that came out. And that was all around this feeling that my life isn't good enough. I'm not good enough. I didn't turn out to be who I wanted to be. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, and there's no hope for it now. I've always been prone to wanting it to be just a little bit better, wanting things to be a little more perfect. And also, if you aspire to have something or be a certain way after you get it, then it sort of becomes normal, gets integrated into the general dissatisfaction of everyday life, and it no longer is the cure, and you're just as dissatisfied as you were before. You know what I mean? Like, this is how my life has been. I am that person. And so people like this guy who are like, my life is precious and what I want to do with it is to revel in the everyday, you know, like that way of being in touch, being really palpably in touch with loving one's life, even when it's not perfect. And I'm sure his life isn't perfect. You know what I mean? I'm sure he has little everyday disgruntlements, and I'm sure there have been times when he's made big changes and stuff like that. But overall, this feeling that life is precious and that he wants to spend his time living well in these little ways. A huge question of my life has always been, like, how do you be like that? How do you love what you have? Like, how do you love what you have? You know, I think there's a difference between loving what you have and total complacency. Like, I'm not saying that you should never aspire to anything. Just like I said in the Fantasy Self video, aspirations that are attainable through a series of actions and that you feel excited about attaining because you feel excited about doing those actions, or at least capable of trying. To me, that is part of what life is about. And I've gotten a lot of joy out of those kinds of aspirations and pursuits and changes in my life. That's one of the things that I have to love about my life, you know? But I think that the fact that I've always had this question, and this question, how do you be like that? Like, how do you foster that quality of contentment? That's always been a question in my life that really was thrown into sharp focus by the no-buy year, and that I've started talking about again recently in this Fantasy Self content. In this moment, in this conversation a couple weeks ago, when I said, why do you hate shopping? And he said, because my time is precious and I want to spend it doing these things. And then he mentioned things that are everyday living in a way. It was sort of a moment of seeing this question that I've always had in a slightly new way, from a new angle, or in a way that was newly clear, and seeing the questions about the Fantasy Self sort of from a slightly different angle, reframing, adding another branch to the tree. You know, it was just sort of this like swooping moment of connection among a lot of these ideas, and maybe a little bit of evolution of these ideas. And that's kind of all that I have to offer you. As I suspected would happen, I'm done with the makeup and I'm still concluding the video. But, you know, I didn't write out my answers beforehand. I didn't script this video. There are no notes. There's no like 3 ways to think about X. This is just me continuing to think about why that moment sticks in my mind so much, why it seems so powerful to me, such a surprising answer in some ways, representing something that I actually consider to be quite unusual. And then why? Why is it unusual? I'm still digging into it because I have more questions than answers. I feel like I don't have the answer. I just have questions, and that is what makes an interesting essay, for example, an interesting piece of creative nonfiction, an interesting conversation, an interesting conversationalist. And that's what makes stuff interesting. So I hope that it worked for you to be along for the ride of these questions in this video. But there is one more thing I'll say before I go, which is that the biggest and best piece of the answer to the question, how do you be like that I've ever gotten came when I stopped shopping for a year. Because what I found was that when I jumped off of the hamster wheel of constantly shopping in order to try to love life more, like I was trying to shop my way out of my life and into a life I would like better. And so I would buy something hoping that it would be the ticket to a different life. And then it would arrive at my house, or I would integrate it into my life, and it wouldn't be, because stuff never is. You can't buy your way into a different life. You can't change your life with stuff you buy. And then I would immediately buy another thing. And so, I was on this hamster wheel, this cycle. When I stepped off of that, I reeled for a long time. And then slowly, the longer I refrained from engaging in that cyclical behavior, the more I became like that guy, like this guy that I met a couple weeks ago. The more I became that version of myself. I didn't have to do anything to start to love my life more, appreciate what I had in a more realistic way, to be able to cherish small things and small everyday moments. For me, what opened the door for that was what I didn't do, which was shopping all the time. So I just backed away. I backed away from that vice, and it started to grow. So it's not the total answer, but in discussing the question, how do you be like that? I couldn't not share that kind of big piece of the answer that I've talked about before on my channel and that I still think about a lot and think is really important. I'm going to go now. I chit-chatted. I got ready with you. I kind of like it. It's glossy and it's mauve-y, but in sort of a nudie way and not in too pink of a way. A look I haven't sported in a really long time. I think I like it enough to go on and film another video, although I'm going to put on this necklace there. That way I'll look dramatically different for the other video. You won't even recognize me. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Obviously, I can't wait to hear what you think about this in the comment section down below. Thank you to everyone who subscribed, to everyone who always likes and comments. You are the best. And thank you to all of you for watching. I hope that you're remembering to take extra good care of yourself, so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.